History is often remembered through battles, through clashes of steel, banners falling, and cities taken by force. But sometimes, the most decisive moments unfold in silence, in corridors rather than on fields, in rooms filled with gold instead of blood. This is the story of a ruler who mistook survival for permanence, of a civilization at its intellectual height, and of an enemy that did not conquer through rage, but through design. What happened to Baghdad in the winter of 1258 was not a war in the way history usually understands war. It was a demonstration, a lesson written once, so it would never need to be repeated. February 1258. A man walks through the treasury of his own capital. Armed guards flank him, but they are not his guards. They belong to someone else now. He passes rows of gold he spent half a century protecting. Gold that purchased silk from distant markets. Gold that paid scholars to translate the ancient world. Gold that filled vaults while his soldiers wore patched armor and rusted mail. The men beside him study his face carefully. They are waiting, not for words, but for comprehension. He says nothing. Behind him, Baghdad is burning. Ahead of him waits something far worse than fire. This man is Caliph al-Mustaʿsim, ruler of Baghdad, commander of the faithful, spiritual successor to the Prophet Muhammad himself. In less than 3 hours, he will be dead. But not by sword, not by arrow, not by any execution history has trained you to expect. Because the men who destroyed his city followed rules most kings had never heard of. And what they did to his family was not merely punishment, it was construction. A structure built deliberately, a message assembled with precision, meant to stand as a warning from Damascus to Delhi. They did not intend to repeat it. One example would suffice. For 5 centuries, Baghdad had been the axis of the world. Not just an empire, but human thought itself. This was where Greek philosophy encountered Persian astronomy, where Indian mathematics fused with Islamic law, where knowledge from 3 continents was gathered, catalogued, and expanded. The House of Wisdom alone contained texts that would take lifetimes to read. Al-Khwarizmi developed algebra here. Al-Razi composed medical encyclopedias Europe would not fully absorb for another 400 years. Scholars traveled from Al-Andalus to Samarkand just to study in Baghdad's institutions. The city's population exceeded 1 million. Its engineers redirected water through underground canals. Its markets traded goods from China to Cordoba. Its hospitals treated patients regardless of religion or wealth. This was not a civilization in decline. This was a civilization operating at full capacity. And ruling over it all stood the Caliph, not merely a king or political leader, but the spiritual authority over millions of Muslims, a legitimacy stretching back 37 generations. Al-Mustaʿsim inherited that title in 1242. He also inherited something else, a state that had been quietly rotting for 2 centuries. The Abbasid Caliphate still commanded religious reverence, but its armies were largely mercenaries. Its governors were semi-independent warlords. Its treasury was full, but rarely spent on defense. Baghdad had survived weakness before. It had endured civil wars. It had outlasted rival caliphs. It had watched empires rise and fall while its scholars kept writing and its markets kept trading. So when reports arrived from the east, of horsemen who had erased the Khwarezmian Empire, who had emptied cities across Persia, who ignored rivers, mountains, and negotiated borders, Baghdad listened, and then did nothing. Because the Mongols were not merely an army, they were a system. For 50 years, they had refined warfare across frozen steppe, desert, and mountain. When Genghis Khan died in 1227, he left behind more than conquered land. He left a doctrine, a way to turn war into a repeatable process. And one of his grandsons, Hulagu Khan, was ordered to carry that process west. In 1253, the Mongol Kurultai gave Hulagu a clear directive: secure submission from every state between Mongolia and the Mediterranean. Not conquest, submission. The Mongol Empire was not built on occupation. It was built on compliance. Cities that submitted early kept their leaders. Their walls remained standing, their markets stayed open. Life continued, under tribute and Mongol supremacy. Cities that resisted ceased to exist. Every target received the same sequence. First came the messengers. Written terms, immediate submission, tribute, hostages, usually sons of rulers, acceptance of Mongol authority. Compliance meant survival. Refusal brought silence. Weeks passed, sometimes months. Daily life resumed. Defenders began to hope the Mongols had moved on. Then the horizon filled with horsemen, not chaos, formation. Siege engines arrived on wagons. Engineers from China and Persia assembled trebuchets capable of hurling stones weighing hundreds of pounds. The army did not rush the walls. It surrounded the city completely, every gate, every road, every escape sealed. Then construction began, in full view of the defenders. A second embassy arrived. The terms were repeated word for word. This was the final opportunity. Most cities surrendered here. If not, the siege commenced, not as frenzy, but as procedure. Walls fell in stages. Infantry advanced in units. Cavalry secured routes. The city was taken section by section. Once inside, the population was sorted. Artisans spared, engineers spared, scholars spared. Everyone else was marched outside the city. What followed was not random slaughter, it was systematic elimination. Survivors were relocated across the Mongol Empire. The city itself was often burned, not out of anger, but as evidence. Because the Mongols did not conquer to rule ruins. They conquered to teach. By 1257, Hulagu had applied this method across Persia. Nishapur resisted, its population erased. Merv refused, systematically depopulated. Herat resisted, reduced to rubble. Refusal echoed for generations. And now Hulagu turned toward the greatest city between Persia and Egypt, Baghdad. In September 1257, 3 Mongol riders arrived at its gates carrying a single letter. You know what happened to Persia's cities. You understand the price of refusal. Present yourself. Submit to the great Khan. Dismantle your walls. Send your sons as hostages. Do this, and Baghdad will be spared. Refuse, and you will learn what the others learned. The letter reached the Caliph's court on a Thursday. By Friday, the debate had begun. Al-Mustaʿsim convened his advisors, and the room split immediately. His vizier, Ibn al-Alqami, urged surrender. He laid out the evidence. The Khwarezmian Empire had fielded hundreds of thousands of soldiers, fortified cities, mountain strongholds, all gone. These are not raiders, he warned. This is a system perfected over 50 years of war. We cannot defeat it. We can only survive it. He recommended immediate submission, tribute, opening the gates before the siege began. The commander of Baghdad's army disagreed. The Mongols were steppe cavalry, he argued. Masters of open ground, not siege warfare. Baghdad's walls had never been breached. The Mongols were far from their supply base. They could not sustain a prolonged siege in hostile territory. The city, he insisted, would hold. A third voice rose in the chamber, this one clothed in theology. Baghdad, they argued, was not merely a city, it was the seat of the Caliphate, the symbolic heart of Islam itself. God would never allow pagan conquerors to destroy the house descended from the Prophet's lineage. Divine protection, they insisted, was guaranteed by history and faith. The advisors debated. Al-Mustaʿsim listened. He was 54 years old. He had ruled for 16 years. Never once had he faced a crisis of this magnitude. Contemporary accounts describe him as a man drawn to luxury and learning, deeply respectful of scholarship, uneasy around military affairs, and confident in the authority of his title rather than the strength of armies. He studied Hulagu's letter. He looked at the men around him, and then he decided. "We are the Caliphate," he said. "We do not submit to threats from horsemen." The Mongol envoys were dismissed. No tribute would be sent. No preparations ordered. Ibn al-Alqami, the pragmatic vizier, tried once more. "If we refuse, they will come. Then let them come," the Caliph replied. The envoys departed Baghdad on September 24, 1257. They carried no counteroffer, only confirmation of refusal. What followed was more revealing than the refusal itself. The Caliph did not mobilize the army. He did not reinforce the walls. He did not open the treasury to fund defenses. Instead, he continued his routine, as though the threat might dissolve if ignored. 300 miles to the east, Hulagu's army began to move. On November 11, 1257, Mongol advance forces appeared 30 miles east of Baghdad. Scouts reported cavalry units, perhaps 5,000 horsemen. No siege engines were visible. Baghdad's military commander saw opportunity. If the Mongols were few and isolated, they could be destroyed in open terrain. A decisive victory would prove Baghdad's strength and discourage further advance. He urged immediate action. The Caliph agreed. On November 13th, Baghdad's field army marched east, 20,000 men, 12,000 cavalry, 8,000 infantry. It was the largest force the Caliphate had assembled in decades. They carried provisions for 3 days. The plan was simple: intercept the Mongol vanguard, engage in open battle, destroy it before reinforcements arrived, return victorious. On November 15th, the armies met 25 miles northeast of Baghdad. Baghdad's commander deployed his troops in traditional formation, infantry in the center, cavalry on the wings. Across the field stood the Mongols, fewer than expected, perhaps 4,000 horsemen. Baghdad's cavalry charged. What followed was recorded by the few who survived. The Mongol line retreated, not in panic, but in order. Units withdrew deliberately, maintaining formation. Baghdad's cavalry pursued. 1 mile, 2 miles, still no disorder. Then the flanks appeared. From hidden gullies to the north and south, Mongol cavalry surged forward simultaneously. Baghdad's horsemen realized too late they were no longer chasing 4,000. They were surrounded by 15,000. What followed was not a battle. It was disassembly. Mongol horse archers fired while riding at full gallop. Their composite bows punched through armor at 200 yards. Baghdad's cavalry attempted to regroup, but the formations had already collapsed. Orders were shouted, unheard amid the chaos. The infantry, watching from afar, saw their cavalry wings vanish into the Mongol swarm. Panic spread. They began retreating toward Baghdad. The Mongols did not pursue them. Instead, they sealed the circle around the remaining cavalry and eliminated them methodically. By nightfall, it was finished. Of the 20,000 men who had marched out, fewer than 3,000 returned. The Caliph's personal guard was annihilated. The mercenary cavalry destroyed. Baghdad's field army did not retreat. It did not scatter. It ceased to exist. When the survivors' reports reached the court, the illusion shattered. This had not been a raid. It had been a trap. The Mongols had used a small detachment as bait, drawn Baghdad's army into the open, and erased it with precision. By December, the main Mongol host appeared on the horizon. Baghdad's walls were all that remained. On January 11, 1258, the Mongol army completed its encirclement. Hulagu commanded an estimated 150,000 soldiers. They did not merely surround the city, they built permanence. Fortified camps rose at every gate. Guard rotations were established. Supply lines stretched deep into Persia. Escape became impossible. Then the siege engines appeared. In full view of the walls, Chinese engineers worked beside Mongol soldiers. Trebuchets rose piece by piece, assembled with geometric accuracy. Baghdad's defenders watched day after day, fully aware of what was being constructed and what it was designed to do. On January 17th, Hulagu sent another embassy. The message had changed. "The time for full submission has passed," it read. "But the Caliph may still preserve his life. Open the gates. Present yourself. Order your garrison to disarm. Do this within 3 days, and the population will be spared." The Caliph convened his remaining advisors. Ibn al-Alqami urged acceptance. "We have no field army, no allies coming, no means to resist what stands outside our walls." The religious scholars still invoked divine protection. The Caliph hesitated. 3 days passed. No reply was sent. On January 29th at dawn, the trebuchets began firing. Not randomly, not as intimidation. Systematically. For 2 weeks, Mongol engineers had measured wall thickness, mapped stress points, calculated angles of impact. Stones struck the same sections repeatedly. Each blow produced fractures in masonry that had stood for 5 centuries. After 8 hours, the bombardment stopped. The Mongols waited. Overnight, the damaged sections weakened further. On February 1st, the bombardment resumed, focused entirely on the compromised areas. By afternoon, cracks were visible from inside the city. By evening, the eastern wall began to crumble. On February 5th, it collapsed. A 90-foot section simply disintegrated. Mongol infantry advanced toward the breach, not charging, but walking in formation. They entered in units, secured the opening, established a perimeter, and advanced block by block. Baghdad's remaining defenders attempted to hold the breach. They were outnumbered, outmaneuvered, and overwhelmed. By nightfall, the Mongols controlled the eastern quarter of the city. On February 10th, the Caliph sent an envoy to Hulagu's camp. The message was brief. "I will surrender personally. I will open the gates. I will order my garrison to disarm. Spare the city." Hulagu's reply arrived within hours. "Present yourself at my camp tomorrow, alone." On February 13th, 1258, the Caliph walked out of Baghdad. He did not go alone. With him came nearly 3,000 members of the court. His sons, ministers, generals, scholars, attendants. None carried weapons. As they passed through the city gate, Mongol guards fell in beside them, not aggressively, simply present. The procession moved through the Mongol camp. Soldiers watched in silence. There were no insults, no blows, no celebration, only observation. Hulagu Khan received the Caliph inside his command tent. His first question was not ceremonial. It was practical. "Where is your treasury?" The Caliph hesitated. He spoke of tribute, of offerings yet to be arranged. "Where is it?" Hulagu repeated. Directions were given. Soldiers were sent. 3 hours later, they returned. The vault had been opened. Inside were thousands of gold ingots, chests of silver coins, jewels accumulated across generations, silk enough to outfit entire armies, wealth preserved with obsessive care. Hulagu ordered the treasury documented in full. Then he ordered the Caliph brought there. Escorted back through streets now controlled by Mongol soldiers, the Caliph walked past smoldering buildings toward the place he had guarded more carefully than his walls. The vault doors stood open. Hulagu led him through chamber after chamber. They did not speak. They did not need to. The questions were obvious. Why was this wealth locked away while the city went undefended? Why were these coins untouched while soldiers went unpaid? Why was nothing spent until there was nothing left to save? What happened next is recorded differently across sources. The Persian historian Rashid al-Din claims Hulagu mocked the Caliph and ordered him to consume the gold he had valued above his people. Whether this occurred literally remains debated. What is not debated is what followed. The Mongols adhered to spiritual taboos rooted in steppe belief. One of the most important was this: royal blood must not touch the earth. To spill it directly was believed to disrupt cosmic balance. So when executing nobility, alternatives were required. For the Caliph, they chose a method with meaning. He was wrapped tightly in a carpet, arms bound, legs immobilized, then laid on the ground outside the treasury. Horses were brought forward. They were not driven wildly. They were led slowly, deliberately, over the wrapped figure again and again. No blade was drawn, no executioner proclaimed judgment, no blood touched the soil. When it ended, the Caliph was dead. The taboo was honored. But something else had been created. A death that would be discussed in every court from Anatolia to India. An execution designed not merely to end a life, but to teach a lesson. The Caliph's sons were separated from the rest of the group. All of them. Contemporary sources agree on one point: none survived. Some accounts claim they were executed in the same manner. Others say they were killed out of sight. The details vary. The outcome does not. The daughters were taken away. Their fate fades into ambiguity. Some chronicles suggest they were distributed among Mongol officers. Others say they were sent east into Mongol territories. After February 13th, they vanish from detailed record. The 3,000 who had walked out with the Caliph were divided. Those with skills were identified and spared. Engineers were taken into Mongol service. Physicians were preserved. Administrators who understood governance were retained. The rest were executed outside the city. That day, the Abbasid dynasty ended. 5 centuries of continuous rule, erased without succession, without revival, without continuity. A lineage stretching back 37 generations to the Prophet's uncle was severed, and the news began spreading before the bodies were cold. After the Caliph's death, Hulagu gave Baghdad to his soldiers. For 13 days, the city was divided into sectors. Units were assigned districts. They moved methodically, building by building, street by street. Those with demonstrable skills were separated. Artisans, scholars, merchants familiar with trade networks. They were removed to camps outside the city. Valuables were collected systematically: gold, silver, jewels, silk, spices, manuscripts. Everything catalogued, everything removed. Everyone else was marched beyond the walls. What followed is described from multiple perspectives. The elimination was methodical. Estimates of the dead vary wildly. Medieval chroniclers speak of hundreds of thousands. Some even claim 1 million. Modern historians suggest a lower but still staggering figure, perhaps 90,000 to 200,000. What is indisputable is the aftermath. The House of Wisdom burned. Manuscripts were thrown into the Tigris. Chroniclers wrote that the river ran black with ink. The great mosque was partially destroyed. The Caliph's palace leveled. The canal system deliberately damaged, not randomly, but carefully, to ensure the city could not recover quickly. On February 20th, Hulagu ordered his army to withdraw. They left behind a city with entire neighborhoods erased, infrastructure shattered beyond immediate repair, and a population reduced by at least half. But they also left something else: survivors who could speak. Because the Mongols did not want Baghdad forgotten. They wanted it remembered. Within weeks, the story reached Damascus. Within months, Cairo. Within a year, every court from Anatolia to India knew exactly what had happened. Not just that Baghdad fell, but how and what became of the man who believed himself untouchable. After February 1258, the Islamic world changed. Cities preparing resistance reversed course. Damascus opened its gates before Mongol forces arrived. Aleppo sent tribute and hostages in advance. Smaller emirates submitted without ever seeing a Mongol soldier. Because Baghdad had not merely been destroyed, it had been demonstrated. Rulers everywhere performed the same calculation. Resist and face a siege you cannot win. Submit and retain your position, your life, your city. The equation was clear. Mongol expansion finally halted in 1260 at the Battle of Ain Jalut, when the Mamluks of Egypt defeated a Mongol army in open combat. But even they had learned from Baghdad. They did not trust walls. They did not rely on sacred authority. They built a society around one purpose: creating a military capable of matching the Mongol system. They studied it, adapted it, prepared for it, because they understood what Baghdad had not. The Mongols were not raiders you could wait out. They were a system you had to equal. Baghdad survived as a city. People returned. Markets reopened. Trade resumed. But it never regained its place. The center of Islamic civilization moved elsewhere. The House of Wisdom was never rebuilt. The knowledge lost was never recovered. The scholars who died were never replaced. What remained was memory. A memory preserved in chronicles, repeated in courts, calculated in every throne room that considered defiance against overwhelming force. Titles do not negotiate with tactics. Tradition does not stop siege engines. Sacred authority does not deflect arrows. When systems collide, the one that adapts survives. The one that does not becomes a case study. And some case studies echo for centuries. The Mongols did not need to destroy Baghdad. They needed everyone else to know they could. And exactly what would happen to rulers who believed their position made them immune. That message outlived the empire that sent it. Because what happened in February 1258 was not just conquest, it was communication, written in smoke, stone, and carpet-wrapped bodies. A warning that traveled farther and faster than any army ever could, and once taught, it never needed repeating.